Russia's threat to retaliate against the US-Japan naval exercises shows it's getting jumpy, analysts say. Tokyo CNN. Russia has warned Japan of retaliatory measures if it expands joint naval exercises with the United States near Russia's eastern borders. The threat is just the latest salvo from Moscow, which has been angered by Japan's support for Ukraine and its growing ties with NATO countries, and is turning up the heat in a long-running dispute over the sovereignty of Iceland captured by Soviet forces at the end of World War II. Russia Deputy Foreign Minister Igor Morgulov said Tuesday that US-Japan naval exercises were potentially offensive in nature, according to the report on Tuesday by Russian state news agency RIA Novosti. We see such actions by the Japanese side as the threat to the security of our country, Morgulov said. If such practices expand, Russia will take retaliatory measures in the interest of strengthening its defense capability. USS Abraham Lincoln left and the JS Congo front take part in the US-Japan joint exercise in the Sea of Japan on April 12. However, he did not specify which US-Japan exercises he was talking about, nor did he make explicit what form Russia's retaliation might take. Japan has not yet responded to Morgulov's remarks and has not responded to the CNN request for comment. The US and Japanese navies last week wrapped up joint exercises in the East China Sea and the Philippine Sea, headlined by the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. Earlier in the month, the Abraham Lincoln led similar joint drills in the Sea of Japan, upon which Russia has the lengthy shoreline. According to the US Navy, the US and Japan routinely hold joint naval exercises in the Indo-Pacific to maintain stability in the free and open Indo-Pacific region. A lingering World War II dispute. Tensions between Tokyo and Moscow have been increasing, fueled by Japan's support of Ukraine after Russia's invasion of its western naval and by the dispute between Japan and Russia over the sovereignty of Iceland north of Japan that were captured by Soviet forces following Japan's surrender to Allied forces at the end of World War II. Japan on Friday described the disputed Iceland as illegally occupied by Russia, the first time in 2 decades it has used such language. In its annual diplomatic report released Friday, Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs also referred to the Iceland, which Russia calls the Southern Kurils, as Japan's northern territories. Per the report, Japan sees the Iceland as Japanese territories over which Japan holds sovereign right, but are currently illegally occupied by Russia. While that dispute that simmered for decades, Japan's support for Ukraine has turned up the heat in the relationship between Moscow and Tokyo. On Tuesday, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida agreed to provide food and medicine, additional financial support, small drones, and protective face masks to Ukraine, according to the statement released by the country's foreign ministry. Kishida's announcement came after he spoke with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky for the 4th time this year. Earlier this month, Japan expelled 8 Russian diplomats and officials due to the war in Ukraine. Japan's actions are predictable and transparent. Analysts said Moscow is jumpy right now and taking out frustrations on Japan. Japan and the US haven't done anything out of the ordinary, nothing that would really seem to be prompt this level of response, said James D.J. Brown, Associate Professor of Political Science at Temple University in Tokyo. U.S. Marines take part in a joint amphibious exercise with the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force Amphibious Rapid Deployment Unit at the training site at Mount Fuji in central Japan on March 23. Drew Thompson, a senior research fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore, echoed those thoughts, saying increased military cooperation with the US is the sensible thing for Tokyo to do. Japan is slowly awakening to the security threat on its periphery, and it's doing so in the predictable and transparent way consistent with the diplomacy, Thompson said. CMDR Haley Sims, spokesperson for the U.S. 7th Fleet based in Japan, described the joint exercises in the Sea of Japan in early April as routine bilateral operations. Our training enhanced the credibility of conventional deterrence by demonstrating the strength of our bilateral partnership, Shims said. But Russia has the different viewpoint. I think it really does show the increased jumpiness of the Russian side. Their tendency now to view actions in their vicinity as always being potentially offensive, Brown said. He said the increased Japanese cooperation with NATO allies, including Britain and France, countries with which Russia has disputed in Europe, exacerbate tensions in the Pacific. One thing that the Russians really dislike is that Japan in recent years has been strengthening cooperation with other countries beyond the United States, Brown said. The Russian provocations. Russia has been flexing its military muscles around Japan for the past few years, analysts said. Satoru Mori, professor of contemporary international politics at Keio University in Japan, said there have been numerous Russian provocations in the past few months, like military drills on the disputed Iceland and test of submarine-launched cruise missiles in the Sea of Japan. Russia has been stepping up military activities in the vicinity of Japan, probably to demonstrate its ability to operate in the Far East, even in the midst of invading Ukraine, Mori said. Thompson says the Russian threat to go back further, noting over the past several years of flight by nuclear-capable Russian bombers near Japanese airspace and cooperation with China in aviation and naval exercises, including a joint Russian-Chinese naval circumnavigation of Japan's main island of Honshu in 2021. This is Japan responding to dynamics that began with the strengthening of Russia-China military cooperation, Thompson said. That's the change that's driving Japanese defense planning and political resourcing, rather than a direct response to this latest Russian threat, he said. If anything, it validated Japan's strategy to enhance its own ability to deter the U.S. to use of military force against it. CNN's George Angles contributed to this article.